So I wanted to officially thank everyone for joining us in our webinar today. We have a really great session and we hope you find it informative. It's going to be interactive so you can ask questions. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. As you know, when you signed on, this is being recorded. So of course, if we have other attendees who signed up and couldn't make it for other meetings that may have come up, things like that, we have this in the future. So this is being recorded. In terms of questions from the audience, we would love to hear them. So there is, if you'll notice in your Zoom interface, there's a Q&A button, and you can use that to ask questions and post those. And what will happen is I will be keeping an eye on the questions. So as Sune and Shpresmir are talking, I will either direct the questions to them, or if nothing else, we will I'll make sure that we get to them at the end of the session today. And just as a quick overview for the agenda, what we're planning on is about a 35-40 minute discussion where we will be having Sune and Shpresmir talking about KYC, perpetual KYC, and where we think it's being headed into. And then, of course, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end afterwards, answering the questions that you may have posted if we weren't able to get through them as we were going through our conversation. So with that, I think you can see the agenda here is we will start with a quick overview and introduction to your panelists. Then we will go into, just dive right into what perpetual KYC is and really having a deep dive and discussion. And then we will move into, in kind of the latter part of it, what our panel thinks of how to improve perpetual KYC and how we can move it towards a proactive KYC, which is not a term, but I think it is something that we all feel strongly about having this in the industry, and then of course answering questions. I think one other thing I would like to point out is that we don't have a super heavy slide webinar today, like a slide deck heavy. I think this is just to orient everyone on some things while we get started. Really, after we do some introductions, we'll probably turn off the slides, and so we can really focus on the speakers today and what they're saying. So moving on to introductions and overview. Shpresmir, if you wanted to take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself to the audience.
Of course. Thank you, Ida. Hello, everyone. My name is Shpresmir Memisi. Long name, but yeah. It's easier to pronounce than when you see it in writing. I'm an associate at the Deloitte Forensic. What we do at Deloitte Forensic is basically everything fin crime related, whether it be sanctions, KYC, target operating model, everything AML basically. We also do some investigations, and we also have some forensic tech, which assists our investigation team. Prior to joining Deloitte, I worked at one of the Danish banks in their large corporate and institutions department. I worked with AML primarily during acquisition finance cases, where we wanted to figure out how do you conduct AML and mitigate risks during these acquisition cases and dealing with large private equity firms. We also work with international clients and financial institutions as well.
Great, thank you so much for that. And then Sune, if you wanted to say a couple of words about your background.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Sune and I'm VP of product in Avallone. I've been working for Avallone nearly 3 years now, and my role in Avallone is to build KYC products. So we are set up to both solve collection and responding to KYC requests. Before that, I worked 23 years in Danske Bank, many years advising people about their economy or their finances, and then the last 10 years I worked within operational risk and compliance risk and a lot of financial crime risk. In my last position, I was responsible for our suspicious activity reporting team across the group. And I have also been deeply involved in how to set up KYC requirements in Danske Bank. So that's kind of my background.
Great, thank you so much. And these are obviously some very in-depth experiences that we both had on the panel here. So what I will do now is, like I said, I'm going to stop sharing just so we can see everybody. And we'll get started in the conversation. So I guess the first question of what we wanted to do is, I think for the audience I think most of the audience we have joining today are KYC experts themselves as well, work in the industry, but I think for those of us who may be watching the recording in the future or joining who have less of a in-depth knowledge about KYC, maybe Sune, if you can start by giving your perspective on, a high level of what you believe KYC is.
Yeah, so I think KYC is very high level that you need to know your customers. So KYC, know your customers, right? So it's all about knowing who you are doing business with. And now we are saying customers. In Avallone, we often use the term counterparties because it's like, in general, who are you doing business with? And I think one thing is the bank perspective of getting information and validate your customers. But I think we see in general that the need of understanding who you're doing business with is increasing a lot, and also validating that. So that could be your supplier, it could be customers, it could be investors, it could be all kind of counterparties that you want to know who are before you start doing business with them, right?
Great. And Shpresmir, do you have anything to add to that in terms of like your perspective on what KYC is?
Yeah, maybe I can emphasize a bit, like as Sune mentioned, I agree. If we maybe can like visualize it or hold it up against AML as a total, one could argue that KYC is the foundation to everything, because when you start a relationship with a customer, you have to conduct your KYC to, as Sune mentioned, know who you're dealing with. But also it's something that is reoccurring if something happens, which we also will talk about soon. During the customer life cycle in a bank, that's something that you can't really figure out why or how. You go back to your KYC procedure and see who you're dealing with, who is your counterparty, as Sune mentioned. And again, there's also a more regulatory look or push towards conducting more effective KYC. So something that we, at least in the industry, have seen an increase in over the last couple of years. Yeah.
Great. So I guess maybe since you're speaking on this, maybe you can also continue and give your perspective on then what perpetual KYC is and how that's different from normal KYC.
Yeah, sure. So to better understand perpetual KYC as a concept, we need to compare it to the current KYC process. So having established what the KYC is, how is the process? Well, currently banks have two approaches when it comes to ongoing due diligence. It's either time-driven or event-driven. So, for example, a high-risk customer could be in need for due diligence every year. And event-driven due diligence can be triggered by let's say, a document expiring or a transaction occurring that does not fit the customer profile. Perpetual KYC is the event-driven due diligence process, but not the event-driven due diligence as we traditionally know it, as I just mentioned, for example, when a document expires or needs renewal. But we should see it more in the sense of when a change in data, either internally or externally, occurs, which then triggers an event or an alert, which then needs to be further investigated. So to kind of summarize it, it's a database, high quality entity resolution process.
Understood. Big words. I'm sure we'll get more into exactly what those elements are. Sune, what about you? What is that? How do you see perpetual KYC?
Yeah, but I think it is the concept of doing things smarter, right? So instead of we have these very heavy yearly, bi-yearly, whatever updates of all the information, that we actually update them on the run, which is also much better from a risk perspective, that you actually have updated data. Yeah, so I think that's kind of the idea behind it. It sounds smart. It's really difficult, right? So, but I think the whole idea about keeping each other updated as soon as we have the information. And for me, I think the perspective is also important, not just for banks to figure out how to collect information, but also for companies to ensure when they have new data to actually share it with their counterparties or their banks.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like it's a lot of, I think it sounds like a lot of things are very data driven when it comes to perpetual KYC. In the context of then, both of you have some very deep banking backgrounds, and from that perspective, what do you see are like the typical elements of a perpetual KYC process, and things I'm talking about in terms of like specific items, the timing, like what goes in, maybe some of the people involved in terms of like standard roles or people in the team. What have you seen in your experience? Sune, do you have any background or insights you can share with that?
Yeah, so first of all, I think I haven't seen a lot of banks that's really good at this. So I think it's also something that everybody's exploring now. But I think traditional, it has been like, document expires. It could be addresses changes where often there's some kind of alerts on that. I think the monitoring of transactions, so behavior changes, and you want to update to understand, why are they now, the customer, doing this type of transactions or using the product in another way than they were used to. So I think that's probably where you have seen it mostly coming from, for example, the transaction monitoring. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's probably where we have seen it most from the banks.
Shpresmir, how about you? What have you seen in your career for the process and the elements?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when we say a typical perpetual KYC process, I don't know if it's something we still can say that there is, because it's still a concept in development and it's expanding rapidly. So we cannot for certain say that there's a typical perpetual process, as it also depends heavily on the bank's maturity and what they consider as being perpetual. But from the discussions which we at Deloitte Forensic have been involved in, at least, I would say it is a process which is a step further from the traditional due diligence, where you really put emphasis on tapping into all your relevant data sources, both internally in your organization. As Sune mentioned, the transaction monitoring, which is a very big part of perpetual KYC, because with perpetual KYC, we move away from the demographic aspect of due diligence and look more at the behavioral part. And that is something that transactions really, give away, and something that we can look into. But yeah, also in regards to the data sources, looking at your banking platform, your customer relations platform, as well as other external data sources, which could be like watch list, corporate registries, SWIFT, also again with the transaction monitoring, or the ICIJ, again to maximize this entity resolution.
Okay. Makes sense. So then I think you were also mentioning that, this a little bit of the perspective you have from Deloitte Forensics, but for both of you, and maybe you can continue and kind of elaborate further, but how is then what perpetual KYC is for someone on the banking side, how is that different for a corporate, needing to respond to it or keeping that up to date? Like, what is that experience like?
So I think, first of all, to really solve the KYC problem that we have and enhance the quality of KYC, so not only updating the data that's already there, but in general, enhancing the quality of KYC, I think corporates have a really big role. I think they need to take their part of the responsibility for the KYC. And one of the things is, of course, to make sure every time you have changes for example, in your ownership on control structure, or you make changes in how you want to use your product, for example, for a bank, you let them know instead of just waiting for them to come back after a year and then ask about it, or an alert goes in the bank and they have to come back and ask you. So I think it's also seen from a company perspective. I think it's also about to take the role on it and then give information proactively to for example, banks. And I think that's also an opportunity for corporates, because I think I haven't met a corporate who doesn't hate these KYC processes. You know, especially every year that they have to deliver all the information, and they think they already have deliver that information, and it's cumbersome, it takes a long time and stuff like that. And I think if we bring corporates to a place where they easily can update banks on the go, I think that will actually help everybody in this process.
Great, thank you. Shpresmir, what do you have to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with Sune. For corporate clients, you know, it can vary, as they also often do not have the same resources as banks. But again, I mean, that could be an advantage that they, due to their size and, you know, fewer customer base, maybe can be more agile in achieving perpetual KYC. But only to a certain extent, because again, as I mentioned earlier, transaction monitoring is a big part of it, and having that implemented with the other data sources is really a key player into achieving perpetual KYC. So when you leave the transaction monitoring part out of it, you have, of course, all of these other internal and external data sources that can help you see who is this customer that you're dealing with, but you won't have the same amount of alerts that could be generated, or yeah, so something in that matter, which is something to consider, at least with corporate clients. But again, there is no clear definition. It's still a concept in development, so there could be a perpetual KYC definition for corporate clients only, and as opposed to what banks define perpetual KYC as being.
Maybe to add to that, I think if you look at the transaction monitoring, I think all banks know how difficult it is to predict and to figure out, you know, what is happening. So I think it's well known that maybe 98% or more even of alerts that are triggered in transaction monitoring shows to be false positives. But you still need to handle them. And a lot of that work and reason for the alerts coming out is that the quality of KYC is bad, which means that you trigger a lot of information, data on that, because you don't know what actually is happening. The data is bad, then you do an investigation. Again, the data is bad, so it's difficult to make the investigation, and you have to reach out to your customers to get the insights needed to close the alerts. And that is something. So the danger of perpetual KYC, right? So if the data is not good enough, you will end up with a lot of alerts you can handle. But on the other hand, if that maybe prevents you from having these many transaction monitoring alerts, maybe you can actually still save time and then do that, and you can increase over time the quality of your data. As Shpresmir says, that quality of data is extremely important, and it is difficult to have a high quality in KYC, and that's also why I'm saying this, with that corporates need to be a part of the solution to ensure that the quality goes up.
No, that makes a lot of sense for that. I think before we move on to looking at, you know, some ideas that the two of you may have for improvements, is there any other, you know, problems or issues with perpetual KYC that either of you would like to talk more about or elaborate on for our audience?
Yeah, I mean, I've done some reflections on it. It may be, again, a bit repetitive, sorry, but you know, one could say that there are multiple factors that need to be taken into consideration, again, with working with this concept. And those many of those rely on, again, data. So the data quality is the quality of that we have on our customers sufficient enough. If not, then maximum resolution is not achieved. One could say that among other things is also the ability to tap into all of these various sources. Do you have a data strategy, validation, profiling, and yeah, those are the technical parts. But another one can also be to which extent the vendor that you choose to support this perpetual KYC function, but also the bank's maturity. At least from what we've seen here, we have yet to see a full-scale solution being implemented, where, at least from our perspective, we can say, congratulations, you have fully achieved, perpetual KYC. Another aspect is the business side of things. The reason why this is such a hot topic is the discussion about the cost effectiveness and the expectations surrounding this. And we have yet to see a definitive quantitative number where someone can say if you successfully implement perpetual KYC, you will save X amount of man hours, by avoiding false positive cases or streamlining things better, or percentage of reduced cases, as well as an increase in customer satisfaction. So there's a lot of arguments for it, but we kind of lack, the documentation part of it, which supports those claims. That's at least my take on it.
No, I fully agree. I have so many stories I hear from customers or other people in the industry I talk to, where it's always they describe, it's almost like when you go to the doctors and you have the little pain emojis, and they always pick a very, like a number 9 or number 10 when it comes to KYC or perpetual KYC, but there's no drug, if you will, that can really help that, whether it's a process or software. Like it's, to your point, it's alleviating that pain is very tricky for people who have to struggle and do that for their work.
Yeah.
We had a question from the audience. I think it's a good time to ask. She asks, what are some regional differences that you see with KYC and perpetual KYC? And I read that as like, different countries or different regions between Europe and North America, things like that. What is the experience that the two of you have seen?
So I think one thing that is kind of a clear difference is kind of access to data and the quality of the data. So I think we here in the Nordics are used to having a broad access to public data that can be used, and also that the quality of that data is maybe not really high, but it's okay. And if you know where the data comes from, stuff like that, and mitigate that, then I think it's some data that is really useful. Where other places in the world, it's really difficult to get access to these data, and maybe it's not as reliable. So I think, especially on the data front, there's a big difference between countries. Also, how easy it is to get access. So in Denmark, for example, it's like everybody can see the data. You can just look it up. You can make an API. You can get it. In other countries, you have to pay for it. In Germany, I think based on the EU regulation already now, it's impossible to see UBO data in the public database. That it's hidden now. So there's a big difference on data, public data.
Interesting. Shpresmir, what have you seen with regional differences?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would like to say that I definitely agree with what Sune is saying. We in Denmark have, I don't know if it's by coincidence or if we've really been progressive on this part, but having that data transparency and ability to use open source, intelligence, as the Danish corporate registry. In other regards to regional issues, one could probably talk about, the FATF. They make these yearly evaluations about these different countries. Where are they compliant? Where are they lacking? Where do they need to improve? So one aspect is, of course, the data, as Sune mentioned, but also the variety in maturity. So if we only speak banks, in Denmark, we've become compliant, or starting to become more and more compliant on the KYC procedures and the due diligence. But one thing that FATF, for example, has looked at is that we're not very good at doing correspondent banking. And that is also something that, the perpetual KYC part or concept can help with, especially during transaction monitoring. But when you look at this overview of countries, then some of the other countries are maybe not as far ahead as Denmark on some of these things. So, and in some countries, there are also a certain risk associated with them. So I would say is not only a maturity of banks, but also a maturity of countries. How far are they at combating money laundering? We see a development, but I think it's already difficult to implement in Denmark, where we have such good data quality and integrity. But in other parts of the world, I can see it be a bit more difficult. And that's without me going into the data governance part of it as well, just so my answer doesn't get too long. But yeah.
Well, it's very interesting to hear about the differences in the regions, for sure, and it does add another layer of complication on something that already is tricky and complex. I think what maybe we can move into then is maybe, Sune, why don't you start with what are some process adjustments that you think, whether it's the banking side or the corporate side, but what are some, process adjustments for any group that they can implement to improve their problems that we talked about with perpetual KYC?
Yeah, I think I will again take the starting point for the corporates. So I think as it is today, most corporates find KYC extremely annoying. But I think they also have an interest in keeping banks updated with the information, so they don't end up in a situation where they can't do transactions or pay their bills or something like that, have access to both cross-country transaction and all that. So I think what corporates should do, they should be more focusing on keeping their counterparties updated, if we talk about that part of the KYC. But at the same time, I think the banks should start thinking about how to make it easier for corporates to share information with them. Today, it's often on PDF documents, or maybe they have an online portal, but it's not renewable, and it's not you can't integrate your internal tools with banks. So I think banks should start thinking much more about opening APIs where companies can share their information with the banks or the financial institution, because often they have this information in their legal entity systems, right? So I think that could be a thing. And then I think also for corporates, they also collect KYC information, right? So it's also for them to try to find areas like surveillance of public data, or doing monitoring, screening and stuff like that, to keep their data updated on their counterparts as well.
Okay, interesting. And you, Shpresmir, what do you think of the process improvements?
Yeah, as Sune mentioned, it's a tricky subject, because corporate, at least from my experience, the corporates also find it annoying when banks ask for their KYC information. So I think again some adjustments that can be done to improve this perpetual KYC is something in the lines of making sure that you have all the relevant high quality data on your customers when you start onboarding them, because at some stage the banks will reach a level of maturity where, at least not to a full extent, but some aspects of perpetual KYC is available, because as we established, not many banks do this, but they want to, and they are gravitating towards that. But some banks are still getting their current KYC procedures in order. So I think for the banks to make it easier for themselves, because we see that they sometimes do these remediation projects where they have to go through all of their customers to get that data, because they didn't have they haven't had focus on it prior, and then have the Danish FSA has then come and said, hey, this is not good enough. I just think that if they do the effort to collect it, keep it updated, and once they hit this level of maturity where they say let's look into achieving some level of high entity resolution through perpetual KYC, they would have the data available and make it easier for customers, and have a higher customer satisfaction, so to speak. And it will also help with the creation of their entities, whether it's an individual or a corporate, names, addresses, numbers, accounts. It will help with things that we call indirect links or linked businesses, because when you talk about perpetual KYC, you also talk about having this contextual network of all of the data that you have displayed visually, so you really can see how are all of these businesses and transactions and individuals connected. So short answer, being more proactive on gathering high quality data from the beginning.
Oh, absolutely. And I do think this is actually, it's good leading into the next question, which maybe I'll have you start with Sune, but then, some of these changes and being proactive that both of you talked about, are there tools or software or things out in the market right now that can help you with that and help transform these KYC issues?
So I think we see a lot of fintech, regtech company at the moment trying to solve different angles of this. So that can be all kind of tools out there. I think there's a lot of awesome tools to look into. Of course, I would like to mention Avallone, right? So I think we have an awesome KYC tool helping both responding and collecting KYC information. So I think there's a lot of tools out there. Of course, you need to figure out how to use it. I think also there's tools helping you with structuring your data. So like kind of getting that quality of Shpresmir is talking about. So definitely, I think it's good times. So just look into all these fintech and regtech companies, and there will be a lot of good stuff to go with.
Yeah, and Shpresmir, do you have any?
So as Sune mentioned, there are many fintech, regtech companies out there who also support perpetual KYC. Of course, I haven't had the opportunity to see how by each vendor available, but it implies that the technology is mature, or at least getting there, and now we just need the banks and the financial institution, whoever may be interested in this, to follow suit from a compliance perspective, but also looking into Are there any business opportunities here again with the spending and the customer satisfaction part? But yeah, for sure.
Interesting. I think we have one audience member that asked a question that, is the tool really necessary? Can't Excel or SharePoint be enough? I guess, what are your experiences with that in terms of like doing it sort of homegrown, I guess, if you will, with tools that you already have, or buying another tool?
I mean, I know banks, they love Excel. I don't anymore. But you can't do it on a Excel, or you really need to be an Excel god. I haven't seen it. But you know, from our experience, you will need to have a platform that is able to not only tap into, again, all of the bank's data sources, which means, you know, it should support transaction monitoring. It should support having, you know, to ingest the customer data as well from your KYC platform. It should also be able to, you know, have external API data sources, so it can match these, you know, you can call them elements, like a name and let's say you have a name and a birthday, and it should be able to match them with an external data source to get this, as I mentioned before, entity resolution, because then the software sees that, oh, this is the same individual, or this is the same corporate entity that we're talking about. And then you have, as I mentioned before, this contextual network where everything is linked, and you can see that, oh, this person, his name also is on a negative news article regarding some fraud or whatever. So a tool that supports perpetual KYC is needed. It's not something that can be, you know, developed in a Excel sheet, because you also need the visualization part of it, and it should also support, you know, I feel like I'm talking very much, I'm sorry, but also but also support, you know, just the investigators actually doing the work. We have seen, you know, that if you have many platforms scattered, you need to, okay, have one look at one platform and then go over to the other to do some, you know, a search for some sanctions or, you know, adverse media, and then you have to go back to a third platform, you know, to click that they are not in a you know, in a RCA or PEP, whatever it may be. So yeah, there are definitely many advantages to having a platform that could support it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It almost, what you describe almost sounds like when you watch the detective series or the police series and you're connecting people with the red string, but it is like, you know, jokes aside, it is very helpful in my experience as well to see that everything is being mapped out digitally as if it's on that sort of type of board where you can connect everything and understand, have records and audit trails of what's been happening with what you've been looking at. Yeah. Sune, what do you think in terms of that question of you know, SharePoint versus a tool or Excel?
But I think the whole point is to make data alive, right? So it's not about just having the data; it's also about using the data to identify these triggers where you should get some updated information. So the whole idea of using Excel, and by the way, I love Excel, but that's kind of dead data, right? So that's kind of the whole idea. But I think that's also why it's so difficult, right? And it's also why the investment in getting this done is extremely high. And as Shpresmir mentioned, maybe people can't really calculate what's the benefit is in the other end. We just know that the cost today is extremely high. So hopefully there will be a lot of benefits of doing this smarter. So I think there also need to be some brave people out there doing some heavy investment in it and really showcase it.
That makes a lot of sense. We have one other question that I saw pop up earlier by knowing that we were going to kind of talk about process and tools. Someone asks, do you see any relation between KYC reviews and AI? So could it help the process or damage it? Sune, what do you think of that?
So I think it will be stupid to say that AI is not important and we shouldn't use that, right? But I think it comes back to the whole issue around quality data. So AI, I think, can help us a lot, but we also need to understand our data and make sure that we don't set something up that gives wrong answers. So I think, for example, there has been a lot of discussion about using AI for transaction monitoring and rule out all the non-suspicious things using AI that just require extremely high data quality. So I think, again, coming back to that, I definitely think AI is a part of the solution, but we also just need to come to that place where we have much better data and understanding of how to work with the data and how it works, which I think many banks are coming to that place. So we just went 5 years back, as Shpresmir said, a lot of banks was just struggling with getting data from the customer. I think now most banks at some point have collected data and start understanding data, so the quality is increasing. I don't say it's perfect at all. I think there's a long way still, but that's something that really helps. But definitely the complexity of the data, the size of the data set banks have require some AI to really to work with it.
And you, Shpresmir, what do you think about AI and working with KYC?
Yeah. Well, I'm very excited about all of these massive breakthroughs that have been lately regarding artificial intelligence and these large language models. I think they will definitely help us in terms of learning and possibly eliminating some of these false positive cases that banks are dealing with, because that time could have been well spent investigating actual money laundering or fraud cases. So I think it would be a great tool, and I hope that it will be a tool that is becoming more and more integrated in all of these solutions. But as Sune also mentioned, it's dependent on the data that you feed it. So if the quality is not good, or also if you just they rely on these accurate prompts. So if your staff doesn't have training into how to properly use these AI models, you could I wouldn't say maybe have some get a false output, but you may not get the best output as you wanted and using it to their full potential. So those are definitely some things to consider. Yeah.
Great. I think we have another question on the point that you just brought up. Maybe then someone asks, what about training for the team? Any tips? Sune, do you have any tips from the teams that you've managed in terms of like training with KYC?
No, I don't think there's any tips. I think it's training just simply means that people should know about this, right? I think if I look back for some of the work that I did in banks, just to actually to come to a place where people really understand the risk discipline of financial crime prevention and really understand what is happening, what are we looking for, what are we trying to avoid, and all that. That's just you have to invest in that, right? So I think this is just heavy work, and then find people that understand it and appreciate it and like it. But I don't think there's any cheap tricks of getting people trained. I think that's just heavy work.
Yeah, makes sense. And what are you, Shpresmir?
Yeah, I don't think as Sune mentioned that there's a one size fit all to this, and then all of your KYC colleagues will have a 100% success rate. But I definitely think that, and which is also just something that we've seen at Deloitte Forensic, is if you invest into the material and really educate your employees in various scenarios, also where they can find more information, because from my experience, people have known, or the people that I've worked with, they know about KYC as a process. I should go and collect this on this customer, and if they're high risk, we also need, for example, some financial records and stuff like that. But they haven't had a overall understanding about, like financial crime. How is it all tied together? How much money are we talking about globally that are from illicit funds that are then money laundered, and just how that ties into like sanctions and stuff like that. It's been more of a do this and then this, instead of achieving this risk-based approach that FATF and the EBA that they really want us to have when we look at various cases. So yeah, invest in education and training in various scenarios.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and I would also actually, on my personal front, I would say that in my experience working with KYC and other places I've worked at, or similar types of efforts with this, having consultants or having a software where they have a managed service that helps you, or a team of experts, consultants, things like that are really useful, not in absence of training, but to also supplement or help with the training, or the team can learn from that, those sort of groups that are helping you, the consultants, so that then they can walk away with the additional training of not just having the taken courses or understanding and paying attention, but really learning from some people that do it all the time. Because very often I feel like the team, at least from the corporate side, working on KYC also has another set of responsibilities on top of doing the KYC responses and things like that as well. So I think that's kind of my I'm not sure if it's a tip per se, but it's it's something that I think I would recommend very strongly. Is very helpful. So I think we're rounding up the end of the hour. I think if there's any more questions, please type them in. But I think seeing if there's a lot of questions already, that maybe both of you can talk about how you would see in a world where we've improved everything. So the teams are trained, people are using tools that can help them pull from public data, that sort of thing. Like, what would proactive KYC look like? What would this ideal world look like for the two of you? Shpresmir, would you like to start and maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, when we talk about proactive and what it is, it's the ability to either create or control a situation rather than responding to it afterwards. And I think that many banks are reactive when it comes to AML and KYC, whereas perpetual KYC itself is a more proactive form in itself of doing due diligence. So I hope the implementation of such measures is something that we will see more of as the level of maturity rises. And yeah, as we also mentioned, another factor to take into consideration is the expansion of AI and its usage. So in an improved ideal world, I would say that it's where we are more proactive than reactive, and hopefully perpetual KYC is something that could help us in that direction.
Great, thank you for that. Sune, how do you see the future for that?
I think my long-term hope is that system will start talking to each other. So it's like, as mentioned, I think that the financial institutions should open up APIs where companies or corporates could feed information to banks when they want. but it could also be between, corporates and corporates, counterparties, investors, all that, and then having system being able to proactively send information as soon as it's set up and there's changes in the company's own system. I think there's a lot of opportunities in that, and I think that will help everybody to make it easier, but also to do it much more efficient, because I think, as we all have to remember on this, the whole foundation is this to stop some financial crime, right? So if we could end up in a situation where financial institution doesn't use all their time to work with corporates who has nothing illegal running in their business, and then they could start focusing on the few one who's actually doing illegal stuff, then I think we will achieve a lot.
Well, that is a great vision from both of you, and I really thank you for the time today and sharing all your insights and all your knowledge for that. I think we can all hope for that better future. So I think what I wanted is thank the two of you for both spending the time today and sharing all your knowledge and insights. It's been really helpful, I hope, for the audience as well. And thank you to the audience for joining and taking the time to listen to our experts share some of their background. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Bye.